Choose, your room or the street, my parents said. I chose the house next door when I discovered that my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, was looking for someone to care for her in exchange for housing and $2,000 monthly. My parents were shocked when they saw the move happening through the living room window, especially when Mrs. Henderson yelled from the yard, "Your parents owe me $30,000 from 5 years ago, dear. Consider this part of the payment." The coffee cup slipped from my mother's hand. I watched through Mrs. Henderson's kitchen window as it shattered against their tile floor, dark liquid spreading like guilt across white grout. My father grabbed Mom's arm, his face turning the color of old meat. Mrs. Henderson squeezed my shoulder, her grip surprisingly strong for 83, and smiled with all her teeth showing. I'd knocked on Mrs. Henderson's door exactly 40 minutes after my parents delivered their ultimatum. They'd been threatening to kick me out for months because I refused to quit college and work full-time at Dad's failing auto shop. What they didn't know was that I'd been having tea with Mrs. Henderson every Thursday for 2 years, listening to her stories about the neighborhood's secrets. She'd mentioned needing help after her hip surgery. She'd also mentioned just once that my parents had borrowed money they never repaid when their business nearly collapsed. I'd filed that information away like a weapon in a drawer, waiting for the right moment to load it. The moving truck I'd rented was deliberately oversized. I wanted everyone on Maple Street to see. Mrs. Henderson had insisted on coming outside despite her walker, positioning herself in the front yard like a general surveying victory. My parents stood frozen behind their screen door, 30 feet away but somehow shrinking with distance. Mom's book club friends were getting their mail. The Chens were washing their car. Everyone heard Mrs. Henderson's voice carry across the lawn about the debt. $30,000, Mrs. Henderson repeated, louder this time, adjusting her glasses. With interest, of course. Jessica will be working off what you owe me. Fair trade, wouldn't you say? I carried my boxes slowly, making sure each trip past my parents' house took maximum time. My father finally stepped outside, his mechanic's uniform still stained with oil. "Margaret, this is between us. Leave my daughter out of it." "Your daughter?" Mrs. Henderson's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "The one you were going to make homeless? That daughter?" Mom appeared beside Dad, her face carefully blank in that way she'd perfected years ago. "Jessica, don't be dramatic. We were just trying to teach you responsibility." I set down the box I was carrying, the one with my nursing textbooks, and turned to face them. Every neighbor was watching now. Mrs. Chen had stopped mid-spray with her hose. The mailman had slowed his walk to a crawl. "Responsibility," I said, my voice level and cold. "Like borrowing money from an elderly neighbor and never paying it back? That kind of responsibility?" Dad's jaw tightened. "We were going through a hard time." Margaret understood. "I understood you'd pay me back," Mrs. Henderson said. "I've been understanding for 5 years. My understanding ran out around the same time you decided to throw your daughter away for wanting an education." I picked up my box and continued toward Mrs. Henderson's house. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice crack. "Jessica, please." I didn't turn around. Mrs. Henderson's front door was wide open, warm light spilling onto the porch. Inside, I could see the room she'd prepared for me, larger than my old bedroom, with windows facing away from my parents' house. She'd already put fresh flowers on the dresser. "The lawyer's coming by tomorrow," Mrs. Henderson called out, still addressing my parents. "We'll discuss payment plans. With interest, $30,000 becomes quite a bit more after 5 years. I'm sure we can work something out that doesn't involve me taking you to court. I'd hate for your customers to find out how you handle debts." My father's face had gone from meat red to ash gray. The auto shop barely survived on its reputation. One scandal and they'd lose everything. I made 3 more trips. Each time, more neighbors had found reasons to be outside. By the time I carried in my last box, my laptop, and the acceptance letter to the accelerated nursing program I'd gotten into for next semester, at least a dozen people were pretending to garden, check mail, or walk dogs that didn't need walking. Mrs. Henderson waited until I'd brought everything inside before she turned and walked back to her house, her walker clicking against concrete with the rhythm of a countdown. She paused at her door and looked at my parents one final time. "Jessica starts her nursing program in January," she announced to the street. "I'm so proud of her. Education is important. Don't you think so?" No one answered. My mother had gone inside. My father stood alone on his porch, watching his daughter disappear into the neighbor's house, watching 5 years of buried debt become neighborhood knowledge, watching his carefully constructed image crumble like the coffee cup, still in pieces on his kitchen floor. Inside Mrs. Henderson's house, I set down my final box and looked out the window. My parents' house looked smaller somehow, even though nothing about it had physically changed. Mrs. Henderson appeared beside me, handing me a cup of tea. "They'll come around," she said. "I don't want them to," I replied. She smiled, and I saw something in her eyes that matched what I was feeling. Not triumph, exactly. Not revenge. Something colder and more permanent. "Good," she said. "Now let's discuss your responsibilities. Light housework, medication reminders, grocery shopping. I've written everything down. Oh, and Jessica?" She paused, her eyes twinkling behind her glasses. "I never needed the money back. I have more than enough. But I did need them to remember what it feels like to lose something they thought was theirs forever." I understood then that Mrs. Henderson hadn't just offered me housing and $2,000 a month. She'd offered me a front row seat to watch my parents realize that ultimatums only work when the other person has nowhere else to go. They'd gambled that I loved them enough to give up my dreams. They'd lost. Through the window, I watched my father finally go inside. The street slowly emptied as neighbors returned to their houses, carrying with them the story of the Torres family's debt and the daughter who chose dignity over desperation. Mrs. Henderson had been right about one thing during our Thursday teas. The best revenge isn't hot and impulsive. It's cold and patient. It waits for the perfect moment, then strikes when everyone is watching. I sipped my tea and unpacked my boxes, each item finding a place in my new room. The nursing textbooks went on the shelf by the window. The acceptance letter went in a frame above my desk. Tomorrow, I'd start my new job caring for Mrs. Henderson. Tomorrow, the lawyer would visit my parents. Tomorrow, they'd begin understanding that actions have consequences and debts, financial and moral, eventually come due. But tonight, I just enjoyed the silence of a house where no one threatened to make me choose between a roof and my future. Where an old woman who'd been wronged 5 years ago finally got to collect, and brought me along for the collection. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "We need to talk." I turned off my phone and finished my tea. The lawyer arrived at 9 the next morning. I watched from Mrs. Henderson's kitchen window as a silver Mercedes parked in front of my parents' house. A woman in a sharp navy suit emerged carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my father made in a month. She walked up their driveway with the confidence of someone who'd won cases before even entering the courtroom. Mrs. Henderson sat beside me at the table, sipping her morning coffee. "That's Patricia Chen, the mailman's sister-in-law, Harvard Law. She handles my estate planning." I noticed she didn't say Patricia was just stopping by for estate planning. My phone had 17 missed calls, 12 from Mom, 5 from Dad. The text had started at 6 in the morning, each one more desperate than the last. The final one, from Dad, simply read, "Your mother is crying." Mrs. Henderson glanced at my phone screen. Emotional manipulation. Classic. They think tears will work where threats failed. Patricia Chen knocked on my parents' door. Dad answered within seconds, still in his pajamas. Even from across the yard, I could see the dark circles under his eyes. He hadn't slept. Good. "Your first responsibility," Mrs. Henderson said, standing with her walker, "is helping me with my morning exercises." The physical therapist left instructions. She moved toward the living room, away from the window, but I noticed she'd positioned a small mirror on the bookshelf, angled perfectly to reflect my parents' front door. We spent 30 minutes on her exercises. She was stronger than she pretended to be. I realized she could probably manage most of these movements on her own, but she'd timed this session to coincide with Patricia's visit. She wanted me occupied, but aware. She was teaching me something about patience. Patricia emerged from my parents' house 45 minutes later. My father followed her onto the porch, his voice carrying across the quiet morning street. 5 years, Margaret never said anything about legal action. Patricia's response was too quiet to hear, but her expression said everything. Professional, unmoved, deadly. After she drove away, my father stood on his porch for a long time, staring at Mrs. Henderson's house. I didn't hide. I stood in the front window, helping Mrs. Henderson water her plants, and let him see me. Let him see that I was fine. Better than fine. My phone buzzed again. Mom. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. Is this what you want? I typed back. Is homelessness what you wanted for me? Then deleted it without sending. Mrs. Henderson had taught me that silence was often louder than words. That afternoon, Mrs. Henderson had her book club meeting. 8 women, all between 70 and 85, arrived with casseroles and gossip. I served tea and cookies, playing the dutiful caregiver, but I wasn't invisible. They made sure of that. Jessica, dear, Mrs. Patterson said, loud enough for the whole group. I heard about your parents' situation, how awful that they borrowed money and never repaid it. Margaret always seemed so put together. People surprise you, Mrs. Rodriguez added, accepting her tea, throwing out their own daughter over college. In my day, parents sacrificed for their children's education. They didn't sacrifice their children. Mrs. Henderson sat in her chair like a queen holding court, saying nothing, letting her friends dismantle my parents' reputation with surgical precision. This wasn't accidental. She'd invited these specific women, the neighborhood's information network. By tomorrow, everyone within 6 blocks would know every detail. I was refilling teacups when I noticed my mother's car pulling into her driveway. She got out, saw all the cars in front of Mrs. Henderson's house, and her face went pale. She knew about book club. She knew what it meant. Mom had been asking to join this book club for 3 years. They'd always told her they were full. Through the window, I watched her hurry inside her house, shoulders hunched like she was walking through rain. Your mother used to wave at me every morning, Mrs. Henderson said quietly, watching her disappear. Until I asked about the money 6 months ago. Then suddenly she couldn't see me, couldn't hear me. I became invisible. She turned to me. Funny how that works. The book club stayed until 5. When they finally left, each woman hugged Mrs. Henderson, then made a point of hugging me too. Mrs. Patterson squeezed my hand. You're doing a good thing here, taking care of Margaret. She's lucky to have you. We both are, Mrs. Henderson said. That evening, as I prepared dinner, a knock came at the door. My brother stood on the porch. I hadn't seen Marcus in 8 months. He'd moved to Portland for work, called once a month, sent birthday cards. He was 32, successful, and had always been Dad's favorite. Can we talk? He asked. I let him in. Mrs. Henderson was in her room, resting, but I suspected she was listening. Marcus sat on the couch, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit. Mom called. She's upset. She's upset, I repeated. Look, I know they came down hard on you about school, but this? Moving in here? Getting a lawyer involved? He ran his hand through his hair. You're tearing the family apart. I chose housing and income over homelessness. That's tearing the family apart? You know what I mean. This debt thing. Mom said it was a misunderstanding. Dad was going to pay Mrs. Henderson back when the shop got profitable again. It's been 5 years, Marcus. How many more years should she wait? He stood up, pacing. What do you want from them, Jessica? Blood? I want them to feel what I felt when they gave me an ultimatum. I want them to understand what it's like when someone you trust betrays you. I kept my voice level. And I want them to pay their debts. You've changed, he said, heading for the door. No, I replied. I just stopped pretending we're something we're not. After he left, Mrs. Henderson emerged from her room. Your brother's successful because your parents didn't give him ultimatums. They saved those for you. Why do you think that is? I'd wondered that myself. Marcus got unconditional support. I got conditions. Because I'm a girl, I said. Because they thought I'd be easier to control. And how's that working out for them? Mrs. Henderson smiled. We ate dinner in comfortable silence. Through the window, I could see lights on in my parents' house, shadows moving behind curtains. I wondered if they were arguing, if Dad was defending his decision to throw me out, if Mom was crying again. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Patricia Chen. Mrs. Henderson gave me your contact. Your parents have requested a payment meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m., Mrs. Henderson wanted you present. You're not obligated, but she thought you'd want to hear their proposal. I showed the text to Mrs. Henderson. Do you want to go? She asked. Yes, I said. Good. Bring your notebook. Take notes. Let them see you documenting everything. She smiled. Let them see that you're not the scared girl they tried to break. Let them see what they created instead. That night, I lay in my new bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Mrs. Henderson's house. The heater clicked differently. The floors creaked in different places. Everything was strange and new and mine. Across the yard, in the house where I'd grown up, my parents were learning that some choices can't be unmade. That ultimatums work both ways. That the daughter they'd underestimated had been learning from a woman who'd spent 8 decades mastering the art of patience and precision. Tomorrow they'd make their proposal. Tomorrow they'd try to negotiate. Tomorrow they'd discover that Mrs. Henderson hadn't hired Patricia Chen just for debt collection. She'd hired her because Patricia had never lost a case. And tomorrow I'd be sitting across from my parents with a notebook and pen, documenting every word of their desperation, showing them exactly how much I'd learned about consequences in the short time since they'd thrown me away. I fell asleep smiling, my acceptance letter to nursing school on the nightstand, my future stretching ahead of me like a road I'd built myself from the rubble of their mistakes. Patricia Chen's office occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated Victorian downtown. I'd never been inside a lawyer's office before. Everything was dark wood and leather, the kind of place that smelled like money and consequences. Mrs. Henderson navigated her walker through the door with practiced ease, nodding at the receptionist like they were old friends. My parents were already there, sitting in the waiting area. Mom had dressed carefully, her church outfit, pearls, the works. Dad wore his only suit, the one from Marcus's college graduation. They'd armored themselves in respectability, but I could see the cracks underneath. Mom's makeup couldn't quite hide the swelling around her eyes. Dad's hand shook slightly as he held his coffee. They both stood when we entered. Mom opened her mouth to speak, but Patricia appeared in the doorway of her office, her presence commanding silence. Please come in, she said. Not warm, not cold, professional. The conference room had windows overlooking Main Street. I could see the coffee shop where I'd worked after school, the bookstore where I'd spent hours hiding from home, my whole small life visible from this 3rd-floor window. Patricia laid out folders in front of each seat. I've prepared copies of all relevant documents, the original loan agreement, signed by both Richard and Susan Torres, the payment schedule that was never honored, the subsequent correspondence from Mrs. Henderson requesting repayment. Dad's folder sat unopened in front of him. Margaret, we were friends. I thought you understood our situation. I understood you needed help, Mrs. Henderson said. I provided it. Then I understood you'd repay me when you could. That understanding lasted 5 years. Now I understand something different. Mom looked at me directly for the first time. Jessica, honey, please. You know we love you. We were just worried about your future. You can come home. We can forget all this. Forget the ultimatum? I asked, my pen poised over my notebook. Forget being told to choose between my room and the street? Which part exactly? We didn't mean it like that, Mom said, her voice breaking. How did you mean it? I wrote her words in my notebook. She watched me write, her face crumbling. Patricia cleared her throat. Let's discuss repayment terms. The original loan was $30,000, with the agreed-upon interest rate of 5% annually, compounded. The current amount owed is $38,208. Dad's face went white. 5%? I don't remember agreeing to interest. Patricia slid a document across the table. Your signature, page 2, paragraph 4. Mrs. Henderson has been extraordinarily patient in not pursuing this sooner. We don't have $38,000, Dad said. The shop barely breaks even. You know that, Margaret. Then we'll establish a payment plan, Patricia said. $1,000 monthly for the next 40 months, accounting for ongoing interest. $1,000. That was a quarter of what their shop brought in on a good month. I'd done their books enough times to know the numbers. Mom's hands twisted in her lap. That'll destroy us. We can't afford that and keep the business running. You should have considered that before borrowing money you couldn't repay, Mrs. Henderson said. or before threatening to make your daughter homeless. That's what this is really about, Dad said, his voice rising. You're punishing us for parenting our own daughter. No, Mrs. Henderson replied. I'm collecting a debt. The parenting failure is just what made me stop being patient about it. I kept writing, every word documented, every excuse recorded. Patricia pulled out another document. There is an alternative. You could sell the auto shop. The property alone is worth approximately $120,000. That would cover the debt, legal fees, and leave you with substantial remaining funds. The silence was massive. Dad's entire life was that shop. His father had built it. He'd inherited it, nearly lost it, borrowed money to save it. It was the only thing he had that wasn't failing. You can't be serious, he whispered. It's an option, Patricia said. Otherwise, we proceed with the payment plan. If you default, I'll file a lien against the property anyway. This way is cleaner. Mom was crying now, tears running down her face, ruining her careful makeup. Margaret, please, we're neighbors. We've lived next door to each other for 15 years. Exactly, Mrs. Henderson said. 15 years, and you never once considered that I might need that money back. Never once asked if I was struggling. You just assumed my comfort was limitless. Were you struggling? Dad asked. No, Mrs. Henderson admitted. But you never asked. Just like you never asked if Jessica had anywhere else to go before you threw her out. I watched my father's face cycle through emotions, anger, shame, desperation. He was a man watching his legacy crumble, and the only person who could stop it was an 83-year-old woman he'd underestimated and a daughter he'd thrown away. What do you want from us? He asked finally. Mrs. Henderson looked at me. Jessica? Everyone turned. Mom and Dad stared at me like I was a stranger. Patricia's expression remained neutral. Mrs. Henderson waited. I want you to understand, I said slowly, that choices have consequences, that you can't threaten people and expect them to still care about your comfort, that I'm not coming home. Ever. Jessica. Mom reached across the table. I'm not finished. My voice was steel. I want the payment plan, not the shop sale. I want you to spend the next 40 months remembering this moment every time you write that check. I want you to feel what you made me feel. Uncertain, scared, wondering if you'll make it through the month. Dad's jaw clenched. That's cruel. That's justice, I replied. Patricia drew up the payment plan documents. Dad signed with a hand that shook so badly his signature barely looked real. Mom cried through the whole process, her tears staining the legal papers. First payment is due in 30 days, Patricia said. Failure to pay will result in immediate legal action and property liens. We left them sitting in that conference room, surrounded by documents that proved their mistakes cost money and their daughter's forgiveness couldn't be bought back with apologies. Outside, Mrs. Henderson paused on the sidewalk. You surprised me in there. I thought you might go easy on them. You taught me patience, I said, but you also taught me that sometimes the cruelest kindness is letting people suffer the consequences they've earned. We walked to her car. She still drove, carefully, refusing to surrender more independence than necessary. As we pulled away, I looked back at the Victorian building. Through the third-floor window, I could see my parents still sitting there. Two small figures learning that their daughter had grown into someone they didn't recognize, someone who took notes, someone who remembered, someone who'd learned from the best. That evening, Mrs. Henderson and I made dinner together. She told me stories about her late husband, about the years when they'd built their life together, about the strength she'd developed through widowhood and age. She was teaching me something beyond revenge. She was teaching me resilience. They'll hate you for a while, she said, chopping vegetables with practiced precision. They'll tell people you're vindictive, cruel. They'll paint themselves as victims. Let them, I said. The people who matter know the truth. And the people who don't matter? We'll forget about it when the next scandal happens. She smiled. You're learning. My phone buzzed. Marcus. What the hell did you do? Dad just called me crying. Crying. I've never heard him cry. I turned off my phone and helped Mrs. Henderson set the table. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard between her house and theirs. The distance was maybe 50 feet, but it might as well have been miles. In their kitchen window, I could see my mother moving around, making dinner for 2 instead of 4. She looked small and lost. I felt nothing. Mrs. Henderson had been right. The best revenge wasn't hot and impulsive. It was cold and calculated. It was payment plans that lasted 40 months. It was watching from a distance while people who'd hurt you realized the world didn't stop when they wanted it to. And it was knowing, with absolute certainty, that you'd won. The first payment arrived 29 days after the meeting. I found the envelope in Mrs. Henderson's mailbox. Check for $1,000, memo line reading, payment 1 of 40. Dad's handwriting, barely legible, like his hand had fought him the whole time he wrote it. Mrs. Henderson held the check up to the light. Right on time. Interesting. You expected them to miss it? I expected them to try negotiating again first. Your father is more afraid of me than I thought. She deposited the check that afternoon, and I watched her do it, memorizing the way she handled victory, quietly, efficiently, without gloating. But the neighborhood noticed. Mrs. Patterson mentioned it at the next book club meeting. The Torres Auto Shop cut their hours, only open 4 days a week now. Mrs. Rodriguez added, I heard they let go of their mechanic assistant. Richard's doing all the work himself. I served tea and said nothing, but inside I was tallying. Every consequence. Every sacrifice they were making. The shop that had been more important than my education was now choking on the debt they'd ignored. Mom stopped going to church. I heard about it from Mrs. Henderson's cleaning lady, who heard it from the pastor's wife. Too ashamed, the cleaning lady said. Susan Torres hasn't shown her face at Sunday service in 5 weeks. Dad aged 10 years in 2 months. I'd see him sometimes, working in the shop bay visible from the street when I drove past. His movements were slower, his shoulders permanently hunched. I felt nothing. 3 months in, Marcus showed up at Mrs. Henderson's door again, this time without calling first. I answered, blocking the entrance with my body. They're falling apart, Jessica, he said without preamble. Mom's on anxiety medication, Dad's not sleeping. The shop almost went under last month. He had to borrow money from his suppliers just to make your payment. Mrs. Henderson's payment, I corrected, and he borrowed the original $30,000. Why is borrowing more my problem? Because you could stop this. You could tell Mrs. Henderson you forgive them. I could, I agreed. I won't. Marcus's face hardened. You've become someone I don't recognize. Good. The sister you knew let people walk all over her. She's gone. He left without another word. I watched him drive away and felt the faintest twinge of something. Not regret exactly, but awareness. I was burning bridges, salting earth, creating a family wasteland behind me. Mrs. Henderson appeared beside me at the window. Doubt? Observation, I said. Good. Doubt would mean you're weakening. Observation means you're learning. That night, I couldn't sleep. I got up at 2 in the morning and looked out my bedroom window. Across the yard, lights were on in my parents' house. I could see Dad's silhouette at the kitchen table, paperwork spread around him, probably shop accounts, probably trying to figure out where next month's payment would come from. Mom appeared, putting her hand on his shoulder. They stayed like that for a long moment. 2 people I'd once loved, now reduced to shadow puppets in a window, acting out the consequences of their choices. I closed my curtains and went back to bed. 4 months in, things escalated. I was grocery shopping when I ran into my mother in the produce section. She looked terrible. Weight loss, graying roots showing through her dye job, clothes that hung loose on her frame. She saw me and froze, holding a bag of apples like a shield. Jessica, she whispered. I nodded and moved to walk past her. Wait, please. Her voice cracked. Can we just talk? 5 minutes? I looked at my watch. You have 3. She flinched. Your father had a heart incident last week. Nothing major, the doctor said, but his blood pressure is dangerous. The stress... She stopped, swallowing hard. I'm afraid he's going to have a real heart attack. I'm afraid I'm going to lose him. You should have thought about stress before you made me choose between homelessness and college. We didn't mean... 2 minutes left. Tears welled in her eyes. What do you want from us? What would make you stop this? Stop what? Collecting a legitimate debt? Stop watching you experience consequences? There's nothing to stop, Mom. This is just reality now. I'm begging you. She was crying openly now, mascara running, other shoppers starting to notice. Please, I'll do anything. 40 months, I said. You'll do 40 months of payments. That's what you'll do, because that's what you agreed to. I walked away while she stood there sobbing in produce next to the organic lettuce, breaking down in the same grocery store where she'd once bragged about me making honor roll. When I got home, Mrs. Henderson was waiting. She'd heard. Small town. Word travels fast. One of her book club friends had been there, had seen the whole thing. How do you feel? She asked. Empty, I admitted. Good. Empty is better than guilty. Empty means you're processing. She poured us both tea. Your mother is trying to manipulate you through your father's health. Classic move. Don't fall for it. What if his heart really is failing? Then he should reduce his stress by accepting reality instead of fighting it. Not your responsibility to fix what they broke. She sipped her tea. The question is, are you second-guessing yourself? I thought about it. Really thought. Pictured my father at that kitchen table at 2 a.m., pictured my mother's breakdown in the grocery store, pictured myself on the street because they'd valued pride over my safety. No, I said. I'm not second-guessing anything. Mrs. Henderson smiled. Then we continue. Payment 5 arrived on time. Payment 6 was 3 days late, with a letter attached. Dad's handwriting shaky. Please consider reducing the payment amount. The shop can't sustain this. We're doing our best. Mrs. Henderson handed the letter to Patricia Chen, who sent back a formal response. The agreement stands. Late payments will incur additional fees per the contract terms. Payment 7 arrived early. Around month 6, something shifted. Dad stopped looking destroyed and started looking cold. I'd see him sometimes, and instead of broken, he looked calcified. Hard. Mom stopped crying in public. They both stopped trying to contact me. Marcus called one last time. They've given up on you. I hope you know that. They're done trying to fix this. You've won. Congratulations on destroying your own family. He hung up before I could respond. Mrs. Henderson was doing a puzzle at the kitchen table. Your brother sounds angry. He is. At you or at himself? I sat down across from her. What do you mean? He's successful, financially comfortable. He could help your parents with these payments. He's choosing not to. He's angry at you because it's easier than examining his own choices. I'd never thought of it that way. Marcus could end this tomorrow if he wanted. $1,000 a month was nothing to him, but he wasn't offering. He was just judging me for not backing down. You're teaching me more than revenge, I said. I'm teaching you to see clearly. Revenge is just the tool. Clarity is the goal. She placed a puzzle piece, completing the border. Your parents created this situation. Your brother is perpetuating it by staying neutral. You're just the one refusing to pretend it didn't happen. But somehow, you're the villain in their story. Does that ever stop bothering you, being the villain? Yes, she said, around payment 20. By payment 30, you'll realize you were never the villain at all. You were just the only person willing to tell the truth. I helped her with the puzzle, finding pieces in comfortable silence, while across the yard my parents learned to live with consequences, and I learned to live with power. Payment 18 arrived with no note, no plea, just a check. But something else came with it. A manila envelope addressed to me, sent to Mrs. Henderson's house. Inside, divorce papers. My parents were separating. Mrs. Henderson read over my shoulder. Interesting timing. You think this is because of the payments? I think the payments revealed cracks that were already there. Stress doesn't create problems. It exposes them. The papers cited irreconcilable differences. Mom was keeping the house. Dad was keeping the shop. They were dividing their remaining assets, which couldn't have been much after 18 months of $1,000 payments. I should have felt something. Guilt, maybe. Sadness. Instead, I felt vindicated. They'd tried to break me with their ultimatum. they'd broken each other instead. That Sunday, Mrs. Henderson's book club met for their weekly gathering. Mrs. Patterson brought news like she was delivering a eulogy. Susan Torres moved out last weekend, rented a small apartment over on Oak Street. 1 bedroom. Richard's living above the shop now. Mrs. Rodriguez shook her head. 30 years of marriage. Ended. 28 years, I corrected. Everyone turned to look at me. They got married when Mom was pregnant with Marcus. 28 years, not 30. The room went quiet. Mrs. Henderson sipped her tea, hiding a smile. Well, Mrs. Patterson said carefully, it's still sad. Is it? I asked. They stayed together out of obligation, raised kids they couldn't actually support emotionally, and fell apart the moment they faced consequences for their actions. That's not sad. That's predictable. I excused myself and went to the kitchen. Through the window, I could see the house where I'd grown up. It looked different now, emptier, even from the outside. Dad's truck was gone. The driveway had oil stains where it used to park. Mrs. Henderson found me there. You're harder than you were. Is that bad? It's necessary, but don't let hard become brittle. Brittle things break. Payment 23 came from a different bank. Dad had refinanced something, probably took a loan against the shop property. The payments had been steady for months, never late, never with notes. Just checks, one after another, like bleeding out slowly through a cut that never healed. I was finishing my first year of nursing school, top of my class. Mrs. Henderson came to my award ceremony, took photos, acted prouder than my parents ever had. We celebrated at an expensive restaurant downtown. 23 payments down, she said over dessert. 17 to go. How do you feel? Like I'm watching a building collapse in slow motion. You can't stop it, you can only watch. Do you want to stop it? I thought about that, really examined it. Did I want to call Patricia Chen, forgive the remaining debt, let my parents breathe again? Did I want to rebuild bridges with Mom, with Dad, with Marcus? No, I said. I want to watch it finish collapsing. I want to see what's left when the dust settles. Mrs. Henderson raised her wine glass. To clarity. To consequences, I replied. We clinked glasses while the restaurant hummed with conversation around us, full of families having dinner together, laughing, functioning. Everything my family had pretended to be before the ultimatum revealed what we really were. Month 27 brought a surprise. Dad showed up at Mrs. Henderson's door. I answered, and for a moment we just stared at each other. He'd aged dramatically. Gray throughout his hair now, lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. Jessica, he said. My name sounded foreign in his mouth. Payment isn't due for 3 more days. I'm not here about the payment. He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. Your mother's in the hospital. Panic attack, they think. Probably anxiety-related. She's asking for you. No, he blinked. She's your mother. She's someone who chose pride over my safety, who told me to choose between my room and the street, who's now facing the consequences of that choice. I started to close the door. He caught it. Jessica, please, whatever anger you have at me, don't take it out on her. I'm not taking anything out on anyone. I'm just not available for crisis management in the family that expelled me. She made a mistake. We both did. But she's suffering. So was I interrupted. When you gave me that ultimatum, when you made me choose homelessness or giving up college, I suffered. Where were you then? That's different. How? Explain exactly how that's different. He couldn't. He stood there, mouth opening and closing, searching for words that would make his suffering matter more than mine had. Finding none. The payment is due in 3 days, I said. Don't be late. Late payments incur additional fees. I closed the door in his face. Through the window, I watched him walk back to his truck, shoulders slumped, a man carrying weight he'd placed on himself. Mrs. Henderson appeared beside me. Your mother's not really in the hospital, is she? Probably not. He would have led with that if it were serious. He's trying emotional manipulation, seeing if I'll break. And will you? No. She squeezed my hand. Good. You're 3 payments away from the 1-year mark. Stay strong. Payment 28 arrived early. Payment 29 arrived with a letter. Not from Dad, from Marcus. I almost threw it away unread, but curiosity won. Jessica, I don't know if you'll read this, but I need to try. Dad's shop is failing. The payments have bled him dry. He's going to lose everything. The business, probably his health. Mom's falling apart. You've made your point. You've proven you're strong, that you won't be pushed around. But this has gone far enough. Please, for the family, end this. I read it twice, then handed it to Mrs. Henderson. He's asking you to save them, she observed. He's asking me to fix what they broke. Are you tempted? I looked out the window at the house next door. In 18 months, it had become foreign to me. Just a building where strangers lived, strangers who happened to share my DNA. No, I said, I'm not tempted at all. Month 30 arrived with a milestone. 3/4 done, 10 payments left. Mrs. Henderson threw a small celebration dinner, just the two of us. 30 months ago, you were a scared girl with an ultimatum, she said. Look at you now. I was top of my nursing class. I had a job lined up at the hospital. I had savings. I had a home. I had an 84-year-old mentor who'd taught me that strength wasn't cruelty. It was refusing to accept cruelty as normal. 30 months ago, my parents thought they could control me with threats. Look at them now. Divided. Diminished. Paying monthly for the lesson that ultimatums only work when the other person has nowhere else to go. Mrs. Henderson raised her glass. 10 more payments. Then what? Then they're free of the debt, I said, but not free of the consequences. Those last forever. And you? I'm already free. That's why I won. We finished dinner in comfortable silence. Two women who'd taught each other about patience and power. While somewhere across town, my parents learned that some choices echo longer than 40 months. Some choices echo forever. Payment 40 arrived on a Tuesday in October. 3 years and 4 months after the ultimatum. 3 years and 4 months after I'd chosen Mrs. Henderson's house over the street, the envelope was thin, containing just the check. No note, no plea, just the final payment. Mrs. Henderson held it like an artifact. It's done. It's done, I repeated. She deposited it that afternoon. I went with her to the bank, watched the teller process it, watched the debt officially close. $38,208 collected over 40 months. Every cent accounted for. Every payment documented. Patricia Chen sent official closure documents to my parents. The debt was satisfied. They were released from obligation. They owed Mrs. Henderson nothing. They'd never owe me anything either. I graduated nursing school 3 weeks later, top of my class. Mrs. Henderson sat in the audience, cheering louder than anyone when I walked across the stage. My name in the program listed her as my emergency contact. Family section, blank. Marcus didn't come. Mom didn't come. Dad didn't come. I'd won so completely they couldn't even pretend anymore. The hospital hired me immediately. Surgical floor, excellent benefits, respectable salary. I'd already been saving my $2,000 monthly payments from Mrs. Henderson. After 3 years, I had a substantial nest egg. Mrs. Henderson and I celebrated my graduation at the same expensive restaurant downtown. Over dessert, she slid an envelope across the table. What's this? Open it. Inside was a deed, the house I'd been living in for 3 years. She'd put it in my name. Margaret. I'm 84 years old, Jessica. No children, no other family. You've been more than a caregiver. You've been a student, a friend, someone worthy of what I built. She smiled. The house is yours. Consider it graduation present and payment for 3 years of excellent care. I couldn't speak. The house was worth at least $400,000. I don't need charity. It's not charity, it's legacy. I'm teaching you the final lesson. When you win, win completely. Hold nothing back. Take everything you've earned. I signed the papers that week. The house was mine. At 22 years old, I owned property, had a career, had savings. I'd built a life from the rubble of my parents' ultimatum. 6 months after the final payment, I saw my father at the grocery store, the same one where Mom had broken down in produce 3 years earlier. He looked ancient, hunched, gray, worn down to nothing. He saw me, froze, then turned his cart around and left without buying anything. I bought my groceries and went home. A year after the final payment, I heard through Mrs. Henderson's book club network that Dad had sold the shop. He couldn't maintain it anymore. Took a job as a mechanic for someone else, working for wages in the business he'd once owned. Mom was still in her one-bedroom apartment, working retail at 53. She'd never worked outside the home before the divorce. Marcus had moved to Seattle, got engaged, didn't invite me to the wedding. I felt nothing about any of it. Mrs. Henderson and I still had tea every Thursday. She was slowing down, using her walker more, sleeping more, but her mind was sharp as ever. "Do you regret it?" she asked one afternoon. "Pushing them this hard?" "No," I said. "Do you regret collecting the debt?" "Never. They stole 5 years of honesty from me. I took 40 months of consequences from them. Fair trade." She sipped her tea. "The best revenge is living well while your enemies learn to live with less. You've mastered that lesson." 2 years after the final payment, I was promoted to charge nurse. Excellent salary, excellent benefits, respect. I bought a new car, took a vacation to Europe, lived my life freely. I'd drive past my parents' old house sometimes. New family lived there now, young couple with 2 small kids. The yard was better maintained. There was a swing set. It looked happy. Mom's apartment was on my route to work. Sometimes I'd see her car in the parking lot. Sometimes I wouldn't. I never stopped. Dad's new workplace was visible from the highway. Sometimes I'd see him in the bay, working on someone else's cars, taking orders instead of giving them. I felt nothing. 3 years after the final payment, Mrs. Henderson died peacefully in her sleep at 87. She left me everything: the house I already owned, her savings, her investments, her books, her furniture. The book club ladies attended the funeral. Patricia Chen attended. Half the neighborhood attended. My parents didn't come. In her will, Mrs. Henderson left a letter for me. I read it alone in the house that had become mine. "Jessica, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Good. I lived fully, died peacefully, and left the world better than I found it by teaching you what strength looks like. Your parents gave you an ultimatum thinking it would break you. Instead, it freed you. They lost a daughter, a marriage, a business, and their dignity. You lost nothing that mattered. Remember, the best revenge isn't making them suffer. It's building a life so complete that their suffering becomes irrelevant. You've done that. I'm proud. Live well." That's the final lesson. Living well isn't revenge. It's victory. I folded the letter and put it in my safe. 4 years after the final payment, I was 26 and considering buying an investment property. The hospital had promoted me again. I was mentoring new nurses, teaching them the skills Mrs. Henderson had taught me about patience and precision. My parents existed somewhere in the city, separate, diminished, learning to live with less. Marcus existed somewhere in Seattle with his new wife. I existed in the house next door to where I'd grown up, living the life they'd tried to prevent me from building. Sometimes I'd see Mom in public. She'd look at me with hollow eyes, like seeing a ghost. She never approached. I never acknowledged her. Sometimes I'd see Dad driving past in whatever vehicle he was working on. He'd stare straight ahead, pretending not to see me. I felt nothing. 5 years after the final payment, I ran into Marcus at a medical conference in Portland. He was there with his wife, who worked in hospital administration. We locked eyes across the conference hall. He walked over. "Jessica." "Marcus. You look good. Successful." "I am." He shifted uncomfortably. "Dad's health isn't great. Mom's managing, in case you wanted to know." I didn't ask. "I know, but I'm telling you anyway." He paused. "Do you ever think about forgiving them?" "No. Do you ever think about examining why you never helped them with the payments when you could have afforded it?" His face closed down. "That's different." "It's really not." He walked away. I never saw him again. That night, I sat in my house. The house Mrs. Henderson had given me. The house I'd earned through 3 years of care and companionship. And I thought about forgiveness. About whether 5 years was enough time for my parents to have learned their lesson. I decided it wasn't about time. It wasn't about lessons. It was about the fact that they'd valued pride over my safety, ultimatums over understanding, and when faced with consequences, they'd collapsed instead of growing. They'd made their choices. I'd made mine. They'd chosen threats. I'd chosen survival. They'd chosen pride. I'd chosen progress. They'd lost everything that mattered because they valued everything that didn't. I'd built everything that mattered because I'd abandoned everything that weighed me down. On the 10-year anniversary of the ultimatum, I was 31, director of nursing at a major hospital, owned 3 properties, had investments, savings, security, dated occasionally, had friends, had a life built entirely on the foundation of refusing to accept cruelty as normal. My parents existed somewhere, separate and small, still paying for the moment they'd told their daughter to choose between her room and the street. I existed in comfort and power, still benefiting from the moment I'd chosen a third option they'd never considered, the house next door, belonging to a woman who'd been waiting 5 years for someone to help her teach a lesson about consequences. Mrs. Henderson had been right about everything. The best revenge wasn't hot and impulsive. It wasn't making them suffer. It was building a life so complete, so successful, so unshakable that their suffering became white noise, background static, irrelevant. They'd given me an ultimatum, your room or the street. I'd given them a decade of consequences. Dissolution, poverty, separation, loss. They'd thought they had power because they had a house. I'd learned that power doesn't come from what you own. It comes from what you're willing to walk away from. And I'd walked away from everything they'd tried to use against me, straight into everything they'd tried to prevent me from becoming. That was the final lesson. That was victory. That was why, 10 years later, when I saw my father's obituary in the paper, heart attack, age 66, memorial service at Riverside Chapel, I felt nothing. And when Marcus called to tell me about the funeral, I said only, "Send flowers from me. I won't be attending." Because I'd learned from Mrs. Henderson that some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some bridges are meant to burn. And the best revenge is standing on the far shore, warm and safe, watching the ashes scatter in the wind while you live the life they tried to prevent you from building. I hung up the phone and went back to my life, complete, victorious, free.